Breaking news, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin meeting face-to-face with the Saudi Crown Prince, according to a tweet by the Saudi Foreign Ministry. Joining us now is Stephen Yates, former Deputy Assistant to Vice President Cheney for National Security Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us. We had heard rumblings of this, that it wasn't just about that Davos and the Desert Summit, but there were other meetings that were planned and they could still go on. What do you think of this?
Well, what it does is it reminds us that we have some very important strategic relations and issues with Saudi Arabia that go beyond this terrible incident with one individual. We have counterterrorism finance measures that we're working on that relate to Iran, that relate to remnants of ISIS and al-Qaeda, and there's just a host of things that go just beyond the ever-important oil markets as well, that the U.S. has major strategic equities with this leader. And I think for the Treasury Secretary to have in-person assessment of where he stands on these issues following the Secretary of State Pompeo's visit, I think is important feedback for the president to have.
What do you think about the idea that President Erdogan of Turkey is going to come out and reveal his findings in a big way? I guess it's tomorrow. He had given them basically a 48-hour heads up that this was coming. It seems pretty aggressive. I mean, these are two countries that have not been getting along great recently, but their public stance on this has been pretend to play nice. What do you make of how that part of this story is unfolding?
Well, I think you're exactly right. It's very aggressive, and there's, I think, a very low confidence in the United States that the version that Turkey is going to put forward, blessed by Erdogan, is going to be 100% truthful. And so there will be pieces of truth, perhaps, and it will look very bad for Saudi Arabia, no doubt. And perhaps Secretary Mnuchin is getting some sense of what the Saudi version of the truth is, and maybe from all of that, our own experts can approximate what they think really happened. But this unfortunate incident is something, I mean, it's a tragedy. It's not just unfortunate. It can't cloud over the magnitude of other national interests the United States has in that broader region. So that's why it's important that they engage.
What's the appropriate response then? Because, a lot of people have pointed to the example of what went on when, when someone was poisoned on British soil by the Russians, and the sanctions and the response that went into place after that. Is that the magnitude of response that would be appropriate from the U.S. here, or no?
I think that's probably down the right line, but at the same time, you do that when you have more complete information that you have your own confidence in. You don't take the version of activists involved in spats overseas. And think, by comparison, Kim Jong-un had his own brother assassinated in Malaysia, and yet we sit down and try to negotiate nuclear disarmament with him. And so these are examples of there are despicable things done by terrible people, and yet we have major national interests where we need to engage and try to protect an even greater number of people.
Yeah. Well, I guess although North Korea, they're not pretending to be Western and modern and progressive, and maybe that's the thing that's frustrating people about this situation. Stephen, I also want to get your take on this. So National Security Advisor John Bolton in Moscow today, trying to smooth things over, sort of, I guess, with Russian officials after the Kremlin balked at the U.S. decision to pull out of that Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. This was President Trump earlier. Listen.
Right now, they have not adhered to the agreement. It's a threat to whoever you want, and it includes China, and it includes Russia, and it includes anybody else that wants to play that game.
So it's a hard line against Russia, which, people had said he's in their pocket or whatever. What do you make of this step?
Well, I think it's an important step, and it's probably one that's overdue. I mean, it's very clear that the geostrategy of 1987 doesn't protect American or our allies' national interests in 2018. The fact that China is not in this agreement, and it is the fastest growing nuclear arsenal on the planet, is a major strategic problem. And the fact that the agreement isn't limiting Russia and really just imposes our own limitations for our capabilities, it just is not workable right now. So President Trump has a string of agreements he's threatened to walk away from. In some cases, what it does is provoke constructive negotiations for a better deal. Maybe one that would include the challenge that China presents. That would be a hopeful outlook, and maybe that's what he's trying to go for.
Yeah. Do you think it'll work? Real quick.
I think there's a shot that it will work. We didn't think there would be a new NAFTA, and there we are, so I'll be optimistic about this.